Mermaids are not just a cute Disney story. There is some evidence to suggest that they are real. Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out more. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about mermaids. So this has been requested a lot. So thank you, Mike, Jesse, and Edna for requesting this episode. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get to it. I mean, it's going to take me a long time to get to every single episode, guys. I have like almost 400 requests. So I'm getting to them. I promise if you have sent me a request, I have received it. I've seen it. I can only do so much. So I'm doing my best. Thank you all for being patient. But before we get into it, I love to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for supporting me and both of my podcasts. Guys, if you want gold, silver, any precious metal, but you want it sent right to your house, so you don't have to go anywhere, you don't have to do anything, get online, go to rabbithole.gold, order your subscription today. It'll come every single month straight to your front door or P.O. box or mailbox or wherever you get your mail, and you can get gold and silver. You can start turning your money, your Bitcoin, into gold. Take it back to the gold standard yourself, even if our money isn't going that way. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold. Guys, rabbithole.gold. Go there right now. Let's get started. Mermaids are said to be an aquatic creature with the head and upper body of a female human and the tail of a fish. They have appeared in stories worldwide, including Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, but the folklore and stories passed down are not as they have portrayed in children's movies. There are images depicting what we believe are mermaids back all the way to the Babylonian period. It's believed these pictures are where the creation myths came from. They are depicted to be demigods called the Apoku, which are like fish-like hybrid gods. Oalis, which is one of these hybrids, appeared from the deep ocean and taught mankind all kinds of things, to include like writing, math, and agriculture. There are actually old images of him standing on the beach, upright, but with his fin, and he had like this webbing that made a triangle kind of like from his hip up to his hand, and it kind of went like up his side, down his arm to like make this triangle like web. He also had this fish head on the back of his head, almost like he was wearing like a hat, but it was a fish. But the mermaid image that we know today may have come from the story of Atargatis. She was the chief goddess of northern Syria in the classical era. She was primarily a fertility goddess, but she was also responsible for the protection and well-being of her people, which totally makes sense. She is known for being the wife of Hadad, who was the god of storm, like thunderstorms, and rain. But she had fallen in love with a shepherd and had gotten pregnant by him. And she actually killed this man because he was mortal, but because she was a goddess, he like just really couldn't withstand her power and her love. It was just all like so much for him that he ended up dying. And it was an accident, but he died. She was so heartbroken and not willing to live without him. So as soon as she had her child, she drowned herself in a lake. She felt it better basically to join her beloved in death than to live on without him, even though she had a child. But the gods could not allow her to die, so they transformed her into a half-fish hybrid. But in a different version of this same story, a fish rescued her from death, and then she became part fish. To the Greeks, she was known as Deseto. And that's where the story changes from kind of what they knew as mermaids, and it expands. So typically, in Greek mythology, mermaids are referred to as sirens. The main difference in the mainstream media like today is people think of mermaids as like nice creatures and sirens as luring men to their deaths. I'll kind of be using the term interchangeably, but in some of my research, I found actually that there just might be different types of mermaids. Some of them might be nice and beautiful. Some of them might be luring men to their deaths. In Greek mythology, sirens were the offspring of the river god Achilles. They were one of the 9 muses. Odysseus from Homer's The Odyssey is the most famous interaction in Greek literature with mermaids. So he and his men were on their way home from war, and he was actually warned by the sorceress Circe of the irresistible song of the sirens. The sirens sing this song to lure sailors to them, and in some cases, it's said that the men will reach the sirens' island and then starve to death because the sirens couldn't feed them, and then the men couldn't leave because they were subdued by the song. But in other cases, they say that the sirens would lure the men to kill them and then maybe eat them, maybe not. But either way, the men would reach their island and then die. But Odysseus was a curious man. Some might even say he was a betting man. So he had his crew tie him to the mast of the ship and told them not to untie him until they passed the creatures. He also demanded that they plug their own ears with beeswax. So when he heard the siren's song, he begged his crew to release them, but they were obedient to his commands. They were like, no, man, we're not doing it. And he tried to get out. He wanted to go after the sirens so bad, but they wouldn't let him. According to some ancient authors, the sirens would die if someone heard their song and resisted them. So with this, that would mean that Odysseus was the first to kill the sirens, who jumped to their deaths into the sea. Demeter gave the sirens actually wings of a bird to be able to fly and cover more ground in traditional Greek mythology. So they were half human, half bird. But eventually they were unable to find her, so they retired to an island, and their sole purpose was to charm and kill sailors. Sirens appear in a couple other stories as well. So the story of Argonauts, where another sailor evades their charms, and then also the story of Orpheus, who was a great musician and drowned out their singing with his powerful tune. So either way, the sirens lost in Greek mythology. In China, they had a book called The Classic of Mountains and Seas. And it actually talks about several supernatural creatures that existed in China, that China went through all these different things. Some lived in the mountains, some lived in the seas, hence the name. So they actually had a variety of swimming creatures as well that were featured in this book. So some of them were fish women, which were like mermaids. Others were shark people, which I feel like we've seen. And maybe they depicted that a little bit in Moana when he turns in half shark, half man. I don't know. But there was one mermaid called Ling Yu, and it's described as having a human face, fish tail, and feet. Because it had a fish tail and feet, it could both swim in the water and walk on land. Another mermaid called Dirian was more like what we think of, which was human torso and fish tail. But these creatures weren't pretty. They were very ugly. And they told stories of how the mermaids would weave fabrics and also conduct business with humans and then bring people back from the dead. So in China, their mythology was that these mermaids were nice, or they at least interacted with them in a well-mannered way. They were also known to have tears that would transform into gorgeous pearls, and then they would present these pearls as gifts, or they would use these pearls to barter in exchange for supplies. And then they would also use their mermaid fat to barter, because if they put this fat into their lamps, the lamps would burn forever. The different species of mermaids in Chinese books each possess their own traits and attributes. And they would live among common sea life along the shores of China. In Scotland, along with the Loch Ness Monster, they also have a mermaid tail. I think everybody has a mermaid tail. They called this mermaid the Maid of the Wave, and they described these creatures as being ravishing women that had the tail of a salmon. So they would live in streams, lakes, and rivers, and if they were captured, they were kind of like a genie, so they would grant you 3 wishes. They were often married to humans. Sometimes it's because they actually wanted to marry a human, but they were also forced into human marriages a lot. And the mermaids in this culture were very spiteful, and that might have been because they were literally taken from their homes and then forced into marriage. The only way to subdue these creatures was to capture its soul and then hide it away. In Slavic folklore, they also have talks of mermaids. So we're talking like Russia, Macedonia, Czechoslovakia, like that kind of place. And their mermaids were actually called Rusalki. And these creatures were said to be the souls of drowned women who killed themselves because of an unfortunate love life. Although they also could be men, and they were called Rusalka. The tale transformed into anyone that died in the lake or river during Green Week basically would turn into one of these creatures. So Green Week is a celebration in Slavic countries, and it's a week of agricultural bounty. But also, this is the week when the Rusalki were the most active. But they are a very malicious and vicious bunch. They do not like people. So during Green Week, locals would avoid the water, and the Rusalki would sit in the branches of birch trees, singing sweetly and combing their long, beautiful hair with bones of the people that they killed, and they would try to drown anyone that came close to them. They were said to be the nymphs of fertility and water, but because of this, the locals would invoke them, and during Green Week, when they were the most active, they would try to like get this rise out of these Rusalki so that their harvest would be bountiful in the coming year. Although this was a very dangerous practice because they might drown if they get too close. At the end of the week, the people would conduct a ritual to ward off the Rusalki to keep the natives safe. In England, there are depictions of mermaid-like creatures in the Norman Chapel in Durham Castle. They believe that mermaids were more of an omen predicting disaster. So there's actually this story about a man that was going to aid a woman because he thought that she was drowning in a lake near his house. So he was like going in after her like any gentleman would. And his servant actually stopped him and pulled him back and told him that that's not a woman. You can't go in there. Then the mermaid got mad and she yelled back and she was like, I was going to kill you if it weren't for your servant stopping you from entering the water. So like for sure a mermaid. In many parts of Africa, they have water spirits or mami wata. This sounds like mommy water. Anyway, it actually translates to mother of the water, so makes sense. So they are described like the sirens. They are diabolical beings who lure men to their deaths. Mother of the water is described as a mermaid-like figure, so human torso, upper body, fish tail. This mythology is rooted deeply in the coastal southeastern Nigerians' roots. Christopher Columbus was said to have seen mermaids near the Dominican Republic in 1493. He said he spotted 3 mermaids, which he described as, quote, not as beautiful as they are painted. So, but every culture kind of says that they're really ugly. They're not pretty. I don't know how we turn to very pretty creatures when everyone says they're ugly. So some people think that what Christopher Columbus actually saw was just 3 manatees, although I don't really know how you can mistake a manatee for a mermaid, especially because manatees have like this flat tail and it's sometimes like just flat and sometimes it's kind of curved, but mermaids have a very like distinct V shape in their tail, and mermaids have the torso of a human, while manatees don't even like closely resemble humans at all, except some people do say that manatees have human-like eyes. So maybe actually a lot of people play this off, not just with Christopher Columbus, but anytime anybody's like, oh, I saw a mermaid, they're like, it was just a manatee. Like they don't even look close. A Dutch sailor, Hendrik Hamel, published a journal describing his 13-year detainment in South Korea after he wrecked his yacht in 1653. He talked about these strange ladies that seemed to be mermaids, and he was actually specifically on Jeju-do, and that is actually known to be the home of female sea divers. These divers actually dive several times a month. They're humans. They dive several times a month when the tides are favorable to collect sea treasures. And that's how they support their families. So some people are like, oh, he just saw these female divers and just assumed that they were mermaids. Other people point to it and they're like, no, he actually saw mermaids. It just also there's just also female divers on that island. So in Egypt, there are hieroglyphics that seem to almost portray like this war that happened between humans and mermaids. Like you have these creatures and they have the tail, like literally mermaids, like the upper body of a human, the lower body of a fish. And you see like the humans on the shore, maybe, I don't know, they're just like around this mermaid with like spears. So maybe there was a war at some point. The Disney movie, The Little Mermaid, was based on the story of the water nymph in German folklore, Undine. So it is said that they can only obtain an immortal soul by marrying a human. And so I'm wondering if, like, is that why they're luring men to their deaths? Is because they're, like, trying to marry these men and obtain an immortal soul? But that is kind of, like, where they based the Disney movie off of. So with all of these cultures having mermaids, is there any evidence backing up that maybe mermaids could be real? I'm glad you asked. So yes, actually there is. So the Book of Enoch is a book that went into different mythological creatures to include mermaids. It's important to know that Enoch was Noah's great-grandfather, and this book of Enoch was allegedly found with the other books of the Bible, but was left out of the Bible. Some people think it was left out because it's like scary and all the mythological creatures. Some people think, I don't really know what they think, but either way, people believe that this book was left out of the Bible and it should have been in the Bible. Now, it's important to know that I am not well versed in the Bible, nor have I done enough research into the Book of Enoch to really know that much about it. So if this is all wrong, this is just what I found when I was looking into information about mermaids specifically. So this book talked about mysterious beings. And actually, it wasn't this book. It was Genesis that talked about these beings that led up to the creation of what we now call mermaids. So the story starts with a group of angels called the Watchers, and they came to Earth and started mating with human women. So we have heard this story before, both in the Bible and in other religions. Every religion, it feels like, have demigods, where the gods came down, or angels in this case, came down and mated with human women. Why they keep doing that, I don't know, but every single religion seems to depict that, so maybe it happened. And this led to the creation of giants, or what is called in the Bible Nephilim. And people talk about the Nephilim all the time. So we know that God floods the earth to get rid of all the evil that happened from this mating. The Watchers were actually locked away because of this. So the Nephilim were wiped off the earth. The Watchers were locked away. And then the women that actually mated with these angels, with the Watchers, were said to become mermaids. 1 Enoch 19 verse 2 says, quote, "The women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens," end quote. So they can never turn back into human women because they're cursed forever. And they are also not as beautiful as portrayed in all these different stories. I don't know how we got to like these beautiful mermaids. But Revelation 21:1 says, quote, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." So people point to this and say, look, God created these mermaids. He turned these women into mermaids and cursed them forever for sleeping with these angels. And then he saw them in the ocean as like these demonic beings almost. And he saw the ocean as like this like gross place that he didn't really like anymore. So when he creates the new earth and the new heaven, there won't be any oceans. There won't be any seas because these gross things live there. And they're like this mistake. But it is believed because, you know, the flood came and Noah survived the flood with his family and all the animals. But nobody else survived the flood. Well, it's believed, obviously, that these mermaids would have survived the flood because they live in water. But when the waters started to recede, that's when they would get trapped in lakes because There's been plenty of sightings of these mermaids in rivers and in lakes and streams and all these places that you're like, how did they get there if they're from the ocean? Well, during the flood, they got trapped there because the waters receded and they were stuck in a lake. So that's one option. But these mermaids were said to have superhuman abilities, such as hypnotism from their voices, so like their singing ability, and telepathy. Maybe that's how they talk to each other. Maybe this is for sure how they talk to humans. But they also are usually described as having black eyes, like fully black eyes, razor sharp teeth, gills in their face. Sometimes we see it depicted on their necks, and webbed fingers. So could mermaids be real? I mean, some scientists have actually proved that yes, mermaids could potentially be real. Whether you believe the creation of mermaids from the Bible or if you want more like a scientific approach, here's that. So there's this aquatic ape theory. And this is the theory that our ancestors once spent a significant part of their life in the water. Human evolution had an aquatic phase around 3.5 to 9 million years ago, although one of my sources said between 5 and 7 million years ago, kind of tightened up that time frame. But the people that just refuse this theory, they say, well, there's a gap in fossils, but that can be explained away because bones are not well preserved in water, so they wouldn't have stayed in their water. And also, like, all these people would have died in the water, so the bones would have been eaten by other animals or would have disintegrated eventually. They just would have gone away. At some point, evolution continued to push humans toward land. It's not quite clear what this push was. Maybe the need for certain food, or there was a competition for food, or maybe some environmental disaster happened. Something happened to cause the continuation of evolution towards land. So then humans eventually went back to land. They would become bipedal omnivores and scavengers, and then eventually hunters of coastal and riverside animals. There are a lot of adaptations that humans have that actually make more sense if we evolved from water instead of land, like our nakedness, or think about our subcutaneous fat layer, our stretched hind limbs, voluntary respiration, and our diluted urine, just to name a few. I mean, walking on two legs definitely isn't the most efficient way to get around. And it's not like that fast. It's not the most stable, whereas like 4 legs is more fast and stable. But it's better for swimming. And being naked would also be better for swimming. Like, why else do we not have any fur? Like, wouldn't it keep us warmer as we evolved to have fur? Like, all these other animals have fur. Why don't we have fur? And not every animal, I get that. But fish have scales. They're very smooth. They don't have any fur. Although some people point to seals. Okay, fine. But we can talk about that with animals, like any animal, right? There's always an exception to the rule. And I know someone is out there like, well, cavemen had more hair. Yes, there are pictures that show that they did have more hair, but maybe they went into the aquatic period with a lot more hair and then came out of this period hairless, or at least much less hairy. But also, like, babies are instinctively known to hold their breath. Like, you can have a baby in the water. I did have a baby in the water. Baby's totally fine. People have babies in water all the time. You're just instinctively going to hold your breath. So, but also, isn't it interesting that we're, like, as humans, pulled towards the water? Like, we like to spend time in the water. We are always swimming. We're always trying to find water. We're going towards water options, whether it's the ocean, a lake, snow, rain. Like, we like water as humans. And granted, we are made up of like 75 or something % of water. We're pulled towards it. This theory was formed in 1960 by Alistair Hardy. And a lot of people criticize this theory because they say that we can account for all the time in our evolution. Maybe. Or maybe they just thought we could account for all the time. Or maybe some people lived in the water while others lived on the land. There's a million possibilities. We weren't there. We don't know. It is believed that while most people were pushed to continue evolving on land, others didn't want to keep land living. They wanted to stay in the water. They liked it. So they dove deeper into the water, eventually growing fish tails and gills to breathe. They evolved into fish people because they wanted to stay in the water, whereas other people just evolved back into what we are now. Maybe. I don't know. But there's another theory about this as well, and it's called convergent evolution. So this is when two species reach the same evolutionary endpoint, but by different means. And they don't end up the same. So think about like wings, right? So birds, insects, and bats all have wings. And they can all fly, but they're all different. Like some birds have wings and can't fly. Birds are typically covered in feathers, whereas insects are not. They have like an exoskeleton. So this could explain how mermaids and people are very similar, but also very, very different. We actually received a write-in from a listener that requested this episode. He wanted to give his personal experience of like finding or like encountering a mermaid. I don't know if he actually saw it. I'm going to read his encounter the way he wrote it because I don't want to mess anything up or leave anything out. So every time I say me, I'm not actually talking about like me myself. I'm talking about this listener that wrote in. His name was Mike. This is actually a pretty cool story. So thank you, Mike, for writing in your personal experience. We're going to go into some experiences of like people on the internet as well, although those experiences could be made up. So who knows? But let's talk about Mike's experience really fast. His story starts, me and my buddies were closing up our ship and we were about to pull out. Me and my buddies were closing up our ship. We were about to pull back up onto shore. The sun just set, but I remember there was a full moon casting light down onto us. And that's when I heard these strange screeching sounds. It was almost like a coyote or kind of like a baby crying. It freaked us out, but there was nowhere we could hide on the ship. After the ear-bleeding screeches continued for a couple of minutes, me and my crew came close to ship's edge, looking down to the ocean, dark water. The noises sounded like they were coming from all around us. Whatever it was, there must have been hundreds of them all circling our ship. And that's when I saw them. I saw strange figures, about maybe 8 to 10 feet. As I started down into the darkness, I noticed that there were countless of the terrifying sea creatures. As I stood there, peering down into the water, I felt as if I couldn't leave. It started to sound like the screams were becoming louder. And it also sounded as if the screeching started to harmonize. Honestly, this might sound strange, but it really started to sound like these animals were singing to me. It felt like a drug, something I still crave to this day. As I stood there, I was in another state of being. I felt something I have never felt that night. As I leaned over the edge of the ship, I could see how the figures under the water were swimming faster. Their tails were flipping in and out of the water at an incredible speed. I saw humanoid torsos connecting to those disgusting meaty tails. I remember seeing them so clearly, thrashing up and down, splashing water. The screeching became incredibly louder, sounding more and more like singing. But the sounds were still not quite human. Then, suddenly, what seemed to be about 300 of these things swam away in an instant, all going in the same direction, leaping in and out of the water almost like dolphins. But these were not dolphins. This is actually when I got the best view of these monsters. They were even bigger than I thought, though it was dark. The moonlight shined on them like a spotlight. I know in movies these creatures are known to be beautiful, but these things are the furthest from that. They looked to be almost gray color. They were completely bald and void of any hair. All of them seemed to have a muscular build. I didn't catch a glimpse of their faces, but I'm assuming they weren't pretty. These tails were almost double the size of them. But as they swam away, I heard the screams start to fade, and that's when I could feel myself come out of this trance. I turned over to my buddies, and I see them all frozen with fear. I remember seeing that all their faces, pooled of blood, turned to a white color. Through the years, we stayed in touch, and every once in a while, we would meet up for some drinks, but every time we would discuss what happened to us that night, trying to wrap our minds around it, but I don't think we'll ever really know what happened. That is terrifying. And actually, like the gray comment really got to me because When we talk about extraterrestrials, right, we talk about these creatures being really big and tall and gray. Everyone always talks about these guys being gray. And actually, like, the most common theory now is that these guys, these extraterrestrials, these aliens, live underground and then they come up and they're gray because they don't ever see the sunlight. So I'm wondering, like, are these like a type of alien, almost a type of extraterrestrial that like lives inside? I mean, it doesn't live inside because they're in our oceans. They live in our world and they don't see the sun, so that's why they're void of color. They're gray. Just a thought, just a theory. There are other videos online of people that work on boats and are out to sea when they see something swimming next to their boat. It's not clear if it's a mermaid or not, but it's swimming like super fast right next to their boats. And like this one video I saw, this guy, there's something swimming on either side of his boat. And they're long. They seem pretty skinny though. I don't know if it's a mermaid, but it's interesting. And actually, the same guy he must work on a fishing boat or something. He has several videos online of like weird mermaid type happenings. So in another video, they're recording the water. There's nothing you can really see in the water, but there's this voice like off in the distance, like screaming. So then he's like answering. He's like, I hear you screaming. Like, where are you? What do you need? Where are you? Because you can hear on the video like the screaming sound way off in the distance. And then it kind of brought me back to that story from Britain where the guy was like, I'm going to save her. She's drowning. And the other guy was like, no way, that's not a person drowning out there. So then I'm wondering, like, do they use that screaming as like a way to get your help? In yet another video, and probably the most common video you'll find about mermaids, these people actually attach this GoPro to a shark. At some point, the camera gets knocked off the shark and like kind of falls to the ground or like the bottom of the ocean floor, and then you can see this mermaid swimming by. It was daylight, so you can see quite a bit, and there's like other fish, and you can see the ground of the ocean. It's not super deep. I'm thinking that they were probably in like the Bahamas or the Caribbean, maybe off the coast of Florida, somewhere like that. I don't know for sure, completely unknown, but that video had me questioning a lot because like nowadays especially, videos can be altered however, right? Like, how did they get their GoPro back? Did they have a tracker on it? Did they dive down for it? Like that shark could have swam a long ways. And then also, you can see like the GoPro gets knocked off and then it kind of like floats down to the bottom. And then as the mermaid's swimming over, the GoPro like almost follows it a little bit. It follows it just for like a split second and then the GoPro stops. So maybe the GoPro is still settling on the ocean ground. That's totally possible. But also like this could be a doctored video. There are a lot of videos online that I saw and I was like, that's completely made up. Like, I don't think that's real. So, but I think that this firsthand account that Mike sent in, like, that's very credible. Like, he was there. He felt something, like something weird happened to him. So why can't mermaids be real? Like, when so many cultures have such similar stories, you can't just ignore that. And the fact that we have two separate explanations, like it could be like a creation creature, right? Like God could have created these creatures. It also could be an evolution creature. Both things make sense depending on what you believe personally. But I think at the end of the day, like when there's so many different cultures from different time periods throughout history that didn't really talk to each other, talk about the same type of creature, we have to start believing it. But that's all I have for mermaids. So until next week, my friends, I hope that you all stay skeptical because I don't think anything that they're telling us is true at this point. So I'll see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.